Sometimes we want to provide different images for mobile phones, tablets, and desktops. This is called the resolution switching problem. So let's see how we can handle this scenario. Back to index.html. First, I'm going to delete this first image element. So we have a single image element. Now in the previous lesson, we applied a width of 400 pixels to this image and provided 3 different versions of this image for standard and high density screens. Now, both standard and high density screens have different resolutions. For example, on this slide, you can see various high density Apple devices. All these devices have a pixel ratio of 2, but as you can see, the resolution varies significantly. Now, if this image is going to be displayed at exactly the same size across these devices, we don't have any problems. However, if we change this to a relative unit, let's say 100 VW, we have a problem. Because with our current implementation, we're going to provide the same image to all the devices you saw in the previous slide. All these devices have a pixel ratio of 2x, so we will provide the same image, which is 800 by 800, to all these devices. Now, the browser on each device has to resize the image, so it takes up 100% of the width of the viewport. Now, this resizing operation can be costly to the browser. The larger this image, the more costly this operation is going to be, because the browser has to load the entire image in the memory in order to resize it. This is the resolution switching problem. So we want to provide different versions of this image for different screen sizes or different resolutions. But there are so many devices out there with different resolutions, so it's not practical to provide this image at various sizes to support all these devices. But what we can do is provide this image at 3 different sizes like small, medium, and large, and let the browser pick up the best image based on the screen resolution and the pixel ratio of the device. So instead of 1x, 2x, and 3x, here we're going to supply the actual width of this image. So we type 400W. We use the W unit to represent the actual width of this image. So this is the width that we see in Photoshop. So at this point, we don't care about the physical or the actual resolution of a screen. We're just telling the browser we have this image with this width. Now for our second image, we're going to say the width is 800 pixels. And finally, for our last image, we're going to say the width is 1200 pixels. Make sure not to use px here. You have to use the W unit, okay? Let's save the changes. So in this case, Prettier beautifully reformats our code. So now that the browser knows the width of each image, it can pick the right image depending on the resolution and pixel ratio of the screen. Now we can take this to the next level. Let's say on a mobile device, we want our image to take up the entire width of the page. On a tablet, it should take up half of the page, and on a desktop computer, it should take about a third of the page. Now to implement this, we're not going to use media queries because the width that we apply to the image will impact the browser's decision to pick the right file. So I'm going to delete this property from here. Now, back to our markup, we're going to use the sizes attribute of the image element. So let me show you how to use this. We set sizes to a bunch of sizes. Here we're going to use media conditions. So our first condition is max width of, let's say, 500 pixels. So we are saying if the width of the viewport is a maximum of 500 pixels, let's say that's a mobile device, then we want to set the width of our image to 100 VW. Now the second condition, if the max width is, let's say, 700 pixels, so if it's a tablet, we're going to display our image at 50% of the viewport. Otherwise, we're going to set the width of the image to 33 VW. Now these numbers that I'm using here, these breakpoints are arbitrary. The values used here really depends on your design. So earlier I told you that you should always start with mobile. Then you resize the browser and see at what point your design breaks. That is the breakpoint you should pick. So now with this implementation, we're giving the browser all the information it needs to pick the right image for different devices. We are saying we have a set of images in these sizes, and here are the final sizes of these images that we should display. Based on all this information, the browser is going to use some math and pick the right image to download. All that math, all those calculations is completely irrelevant to us. So now on mobiles, our image takes up the entire width of the page. On tablets, it takes up half of the page. And on desktops, it takes up a third of the page. All right, one last thing before we finish this lesson. In this lesson, I chose these sizes, 400, 1800, and 1200, but I picked the sizes arbitrarily. It doesn't mean that you should always supply 3 versions of your image at these sizes. The best way to decide on the sizes and generate image assets is using this website, responsivebreakpoints.com. Here we can upload a file, and this website would automatically generate our image assets according to these settings. So we can set the resolution. The default value is between 200 to 1400. That covers most screens out there. So I think that's a good setting. Next, we have size step. With this, we can specify how much each image asset is going to be smaller than the previous image assets. The default setting is 20 kilobytes. So each image file will be 20 kilobytes smaller. Now we can change this to, let's say, 50 kilobytes. Then we have the maximum number of image assets. The default is 20, but I think that's an overkill. We don't want to supply 20 versions of the same image. The performance gain is really negligible. So I would prefer to set this to somewhere between, let's say, 3 to 5. But of course, that's subjective. Now we can upload a file. So I'm going to upload mil-full here. We're going to give it a few seconds. All right, our image assets are ready. So on the right side, you can see all these images. The smallest is 200 by 200, and the file size is 28 kilobytes. The next image is almost 3 times bigger, and the file size is almost 5 times bigger. So it's more than 50 kilobytes that we saw earlier. So similarly, we have a few other images. We can view each of these images individually, or we can download them all as a zip file. Also, over here, you can see an example of an image tag. So you can add this to your markup and make the necessary changes.